Hello and welcome. You're watching To The Point. As concerns about Indians trapped in Iraq grow, what exactly is their condition? Have they been kidnapped? Are they hostages? Or are they being kept in protective custody for their own safety? And what can India do to help or rescue them? That's the first set of questions we hope to answer tonight. But beyond that, where is Iraq itself heading? Is partition a growing possibility? Could ISIL engulf the Muslim world in Shia-Sunni sectarian warfare? That's the second set of questions we'll try and answer tonight. And now joining me for a special one-hour discussion on the situation in Iraq is the Strategic Affairs Editor of The Hindu, Praveen Swami, former Ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Oman and the UAE, Talmiz Ahmed, the Executive Director of the Institute of Conflict Management, Ajay Sani, former Ambassador to Iran, K.C. Singh, Akali Dal MP, Naresh Gujral, and Congress spokesman and former Minister, Shashi Tharoor. Praveen Swami, let's start with the 40 Indian workers. Have they been kidnapped, as the MEA claimed yesterday and reiterated again today? Or are they being protected by ISIS, as your paper, The Hindu, suggested this morning, and as many next of kin seem to be saying on TV?
Well, the simple answer is I don't have an answer to that, and neither does anyone else. But here's what we know from the kin of the 40 workers who they've been speaking to on a regular basis. We know they were stuck at a construction site when the fighting broke out, that they were looked after by armed militia. They were fed, they were treated well. They've now been taken to another site, a cotton warehouse, some 20 kilometers away from where the fighting is going on. And again, they're being fed, they're being properly cared for, and they've been told they're free to leave once the fighting dies down. Now, it seems to me from this description that if they're hostages, then they're in a very strange kind of captivity. Kidnappers don't normally allow their victims to, sit quietly cooking their own food and communicate with their loved ones on WeChat, make phone calls. Of course, anything is conceivable, but the evidence doesn't point in that direction. I should also add that we don't know for a fact who exactly is holding them. They were free to go. There's nowhere they can go because there's fighting going on. There's no transport. So in my personal view, judging by what the families are saying, whoever is holding them is doing them an act of kindness because they're making sure they don't get killed.
Let me build on what you've just heard, Dr. Sani, from Praveen Swami by quoting two sets of facts to you. According to The Hindu, Nishant Singh, who's allegedly kidnapped, yesterday told his brother Charanjit Singh that he was safe and not held hostage. A couple of days earlier, according to ABP Live, Manjinder Singh, who's allegedly kidnapped, told his sister Gurvinder Kaur not to worry, he was well looked after. How do those facts compare alongside what the Iraqi Red Crescent and the Iraqi government is telling our Ministry of External Affairs, that these people are kidnapped? We seem to have two different stories.
Absolutely, and I would not try to speculatively shed any kind of clarity on the issue, for the simple reason that what we have is the facts Praveen has given you. The point basically is that they are being held in custody there. There has been external contact with them, including Red Cross personnel. If there was a particular eagerness to hand them over, I am sure something could be worked out to escort them out of the area of fighting. If not in the direction of Baghdad, then elsewhere. So I would like to say that they are being held. This is apparently all we know.
What about Praveen's point that if they are being held, this is an act of kindness because the situation is so disturbed? Were they free on the roads, they could actually meet with some disaster.
There are two things to see here. You see, we have a comparable situation in Tikrit where you have the nurses, where the ISIL is interested in retaining these people there. Now, those are, of course, a specialized trained set of people who would have a utility in for any successor regime or a successor administration. So there may be an interest in holding these people there without terrorizing them, allowing them to feel a sense of security. while the people holding them decide precisely what they are to do with them, whether they are an asset that is to be traded, whether they are an enemy or unbelievers who are to be eliminated.
So they're in a sort of grey area.
They're in a grey area. We don't know what their actual situation is.
Shashi Tharoor, let me put this to you as a former Minister of State for External Affairs. If the relatives of the kidnapped can be in touch with those who are allegedly kidnapped and believe that they may not be kidnapped or that they may not be in such a bad situation, then how is it that our MEA or our embassy in Baghdad is not in direct touch with them? I find that a little perplexing. How would you explain that?
Well, I can't answer that because I don't exactly know how these channels of communication are working and why the channels used by the families are not made available to our own government authorities. It's very clear these people are trapped, whether they're kidnapped, they're in custody, they're in preventive detention, whatever it may be. And so the situation, the urgency of the situation comes from the pressure of the anxious families here, some of the hysteria being whipped up in our media, and of course the legitimate desire of everyone in the government of India to see them safe before anything worse happens to them. Now the question of evacuating them to safety from Mosul, there's no way they can go through the fighting to Baghdad. It's going to have to be towards the north, towards Erbil or Sulaymaniyah. And there again, transport is required. I'm not sure that logistics capacity is available to the Iraqi authorities that our government is in touch with. We're also, I believe, in touch with the UN assistance mission in Iraq, but one doesn't know what their logistical capacity is when it comes to moving 41 people. So there are a number of practical challenges, and it may well be that the people are staying where they're staying because even if they were free to go, they have no means to go anywhere in safety. And again, then an aircraft would have to be organized to Erbil or Sulaymaniyah to get them out and get them towards safety. So a lot of these questions still remain. And I'm sure the MEA is working on them, and they're not telling us very much.
Naresh Gujral, I don't wish to cast aspersions on the MEA in any sense. But the MEA is relying on what was told to them by the Red Crescent yesterday and what was told to them today by the Iraqi government. But given the state of confusion in Iraq, how confident can we be of what the MEA is discovering from such sources? I mean, is it quite possible that the Red Crescent has concluded people are kidnapped, whereas in fact they may be, as Shashi Tharoor put it, trapped by circumstances, which is a different thing?
Karan, two things. I met Mrs. Sushma Swaraj about an hour ago with the Chief Minister of Punjab. We met her last night also. So what we've been told by her is that they are safe, but obviously the government of India does not know in whose custody they are. We were told that they were in a cotton factory, but apparently they've been moved from there to a government building now. Things are confusing, but the reason why they are in touch with their families from time to time and not with the government is very simple. I think the batteries of their mobiles have run out. Once in a while, for a minute or two, if they're able to call, obviously they will call home and not call the government of India. So that is the reason why some news was coming to the families and not directly to the government. Having said that, what worries me a little bit is that when they were captured, there were also some Bangladeshis with them. The Bangladeshis were let off, perhaps because they were Sunnis. But these Sikhs were held back. That is a cause for concern.
Very quickly, before I come to KC Singh and I come to Talmiz Ahmed, I know that Praveen Swami, you're following this situation. Have the Bangladeshis been let off? I thought, in fact, the position was that in the warehouse or the cotton factory where the workers are being kept, there are with them people of other nationalities also. So can you clarify, have the Bangladeshis been let off, or are some Bangladeshis being detained with the Indians from what you know?
Again, with the caveat that I have no independent means of verifying this, what we were told by the government this morning was that there were workers from several nationalities who were being held in the warehouse. And we do know from independent media reports from the region that there are a large number of Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Nepali and various East Asian workers who are missing. I assume Mr. Gujral has some kind of authoritative source for this claim that Bangladeshis were let off while only 6 were held. But that's not what any of the families have said in any of the media who've spoken to them so far. So I earnestly hope he'll tell us what the basis for that claim is.
Casey Singh, would you accept that because there's been no demand for ransom and no demand for anything else either, and in the meantime, on several occasions, these allegedly kidnapped are also in touch with the next of kin, that in fact, this is not a clear-cut kidnap situation, that it may be closer to some situation of being entrapped rather than kidnapped? I don't want to use a definitive word, I'm trying to be suggestive, and what I'm trying to suggest is that we don't have a clear idea, certainly not a clear-cut idea of kidnap.
I think, Karan, it will be unwise to come to any such conclusion. They are clearly being held against their will. Excuses given to them are that they can't be handed over. But if you just look, if you'll just give me a minute, look at the map of Iraq. Let me explain to your viewers that there are two great rivers, and the eastern of the rivers, the Tigris, runs directly north-south. It starts in Mosul and comes all the way down to Baghdad. All these towns are on that river. And the attack has come from the west. And that is why it is not a case of one town falling after the other. All the towns have been attacked at the same time because the attack has come from the side. Now, what is happening is that to the east, you have a relatively safe region called the Kurdish Autonomous Region. There's absolutely no problem or any fighting or any major fighting between ISIS and the Kurds. So I can't see why people from Mosul cannot move to Erbil, which is directly almost east of Mosul. The fighting is all in the south, closer to Baghdad. There is no fighting up there. So if they are being given an excuse, that's not a very plausible excuse. Their holders could have got in touch with the Kurds and said, we have some. So what I would suggest is, if indeed we should be in touch with Bangladeshis and the others to find out if any nationals of theirs have managed to come out. Because we know that even the Turkish diplomats are stuck in Tikrit.
Quite right.
So it is not, and the Turks are Sunnis. So it's not just a question of Sunni Shia. There is utter confusion in that area.
In fact, can I stop you there and bring in Talmiz Ahmed? Talmiz Ahmed, there was a good point being made there by Casey Singh. To what extent is the answer to that point the fact that we're not sure that these Indians who've been kidnapped or trapped, or whatever the correct word is, have actually been kidnapped or trapped by ISIS? Could it not be something that was done by other tribal Sunni groups or by people who are breakaway factions or breakaway generals from Saddam Hussein's collapsed army? All of those are allegedly functioning in this area. Do we have a clear idea who's responsible? Because if we don't, then that could be an answer to why they haven't been taken across eastwards for safety into Kurdish areas.
Yeah. Let me explain the situation to you. There are two aspects here. Number one is that there is a state of insurgency. It is extremely widespread. Large swaths of territory have been occupied by this insurgent group. It is a war situation. Several hundred people have been executed. Large numbers of people have been held hostage or are in prisons. The second aspect is about ISIS itself. ISIS is a coalition. It is a conglomeration of several interest groups united together primarily on the basis of hostility to Maliki and his government, which has ruled Iraq for the last 8 years. In this coalition, you do have certain other non-jihadi elements, you have tribal elements, you have also got Baathist elements, various Sufi elements, etc. So the situation is quite complex. The leadership is very clearly with the jihadis. Now, I personally feel that because of the threat of assault by air, I am not sure that they want to release all these people, because then you will get exposed to air assault and large numbers of your people may be killed. I think they would like to retain some of these people in a sort of hostage situation in order to ensure that there is no assault from the air. And in the meantime, they will keep on consolidating themselves on the ground.
You've heard just now, Praveen Swami, that one explanation could be that the Indian workers and maybe workers from other nationalities are being held as hostage in case there are airstrikes to deter American airstrikes, which would then end up with collateral damage. How does that square with what your paper reported today? Because your paper says that ISIS has told the workers that without ISIS protection, they could be killed by Iraqi or Iranian security forces in a bid to pin the blame on ISIS. Secondly, your paper suggested that they will be released if someone from the Indian military or government takes charge of them, presumably to give them security. And thirdly, till then, they were welcome to stay with ISIS for as long as necessary. How does that square with what you've heard either from KC Singh or Talmiz Ahmed?
Well, what Mr. Singh is saying is perfectly believable. Maybe they're being lied to and kept as human shields. We do know that ISIS over the last few days has been encouraging civilian refugees who ran away towards Abril before taking Mosul. The people who ran away there are being encouraged to come back. They're being offered cooking gas at very cheap prices. The local merchants have been coerced to make vegetables and grain available at cheap prices. Electricity has been restored in some areas, and these are obviously measures intended to rebuild the civilian population and make the new rulers of Mosul that much less vulnerable to large-scale attack. Having said that, it doesn't seem very plausible to me that anyone would think that the Iraqi armed forces would be deterred from retaking territory because there are 40 Indian workers in a factory somewhere. I honestly think, the chaos of war theory is the most plausible one. I mean, let's face it, ISIS has probably got bigger things to be worrying about right now than the fate of a couple of hundred migrant workers from here and there. It found these people, they're stuck in a warehouse, and someone somewhere as we talk is probably figuring out what to do with them. I don't think in the middle of this chaos that we're going to see any, very rapid or easy breakthrough. The heartening side is there doesn't seem to be any immediate threat to any of these people's lives. And it surprises me a little bit that without any compelling evidence that lives were a threat or that any coercive means were being used against the hostages, that we so publicly have proclaimed that these people are being kidnapped, held hostage. If I was if I was someone keeping these people in protective custody and then had these sort of insults hurled at me in the international media, I would not be very pleased. And I'm not sure that by making these accusations without evidence so far, that we in fact serve the interests of these hostages very well.
I want to quickly begin, Shashi Tharoor, before I come back to Dr. Sani. It's not just the situation that surrounds the workers that seems to be confused or grey or disputed. That also seems to be the case with the 46 nurses in Tikrit. Originally, we believed that they were desperate to get out. Today, the Times of India reports that in fact 46 of them want to continue to stay because they've been assured they'll get their full salaries. Does it therefore mean that whether you're talking about the construction workers or the nurses, many of whom come in fact from your state, Kerala, we simply don't have a clear picture? And we're getting fragments of information, variously interpreted either by officials or the press, and the situation is both as a result complicated and confusing, but certainly not clear.
Exactly right. It's clear that it's not clear, Karan. I mean, 40 of those 46 nurses are from Kerala, and there's been a lot of anxiety about their well-being, particularly from family members left behind, whom they've been supporting with their remittances from Iraq. But the fact still is that the situation is largely unknown. There was a feeling at one point that in Tikrit, because fighting was going on all around, and there were sort of explosions being heard and so on, and the nurses were essentially huddling together in corridors. The kitchen staff were giving them vital supplies, basically bread and water, in order to survive, that it was just a question of trying to get them out. But get them out how? How do you get anyone out through a fighting war when you don't have the capacity to do that, and nobody has the capacity to do that? We have the same situation perhaps with these people who are trapped in Mosul, that even if they wanted to leave, which as you may not be able to logistically organize their departure towards the safety of Erbil and Sulaymaniyah, where there are airports in which we could fly in an Indian chartered aircraft if we can get them there. So again, I think we need more clarity, and I agree with Praveen Swami that we need to keep a slightly level head and not immediately start denouncing people for kidnapping and threats and so on, which may not in fact have actually occurred.
Let me put the opposite viewpoint as articulated by the MEA when they were asked questions whether in fact the Indian workers are kidnapped or trapped or whether being kept in some sort of protective safe custody for their own good. And the answer is, why would ISIS want to protect them? And if they're being detained without permission to leave, then whether they're safe or not is irrelevant. They are being detained, they are captive. How do you respond to that response from the MEA?
You see, very simply, first of all, let's get it clear. We don't know what circumstances they're being held in. Number two, there has not, clearly no decision has been taken on them as far as ISIS itself is concerned. We don't know how ISIS is going to treat them in future. It may be perfectly well. They have already spoken in Tikrit about the continued employment of the nurses. The point I would like to make in all this frenzy about their condition is that these are individuals who put themselves in harm's way. This is not a situation that arose over the last 24 hours.
You mean they should have known better?
Absolutely. I would certainly say there is a certain responsibility on government, irrespective of what circumstances led these people there to stay on. But the point is, and I think it was the Hindu report again which very clearly said that the families of these individuals in Mosul
forced them to go.
were saying come back. The situation is very bad, and they said we can't come back, we still owed 5 months of wages. Now these are individuals who have put themselves in harm's way, and I think that is a fact that we should not completely ignore.
Naresh Gujarat, let me put that to you because it is a seemingly contentious point. You're a Punjabi MP and at least those 40 construction workers are Punjabis. Your Chief Minister is deeply concerned about their safety. How do you respond to this analytical point from Dr. Sani that we mustn't forget the fact that these are individuals who have deliberately put themselves in harm's way?
Karan, look at it from their point of view. They have taken huge loans to go there. There are these sharks who take them there. Some of them have sold their land. So obviously, when things were not so bad, they were hoping that things would improve, that they would get their back wages, and then they would come back. They didn't realize that so suddenly things would get out of hand. So you can't really blame them.
Okay, I take that point, and in fact at the end of the day this is not a moment to blame them. I simply wanted you to respond to a point made by Dr. Sani. I want to widen the discussion a little. Casey saying, given the situation that prevails in Iraq today, and I'm not talking about whether they're kidnapped, trapped or whatever other verb we want to use, I'm talking about the state of confusion in that country which is virtually caught up in a terrible civil war, maybe poised to even partition. Does India have the military capability to attempt a military rescue? Or do the circumstances simply make that impossible?
Well, firstly, you have no intelligence. So rescue them from where? Secondly, you do not have the capability to create a base there. At best, you can use an aircraft carrier, but where do you lift the people to? And in any case, the Iraqi government is friendly. So if you need to help, you can send your people there and work with them. Or you can go to the Kurdish autonomous region and work with them. But we don't have the kind of capability to go marching into a town without knowing whom we are helping and where they are held. It's just, it'll be a doomsday scenario. And particularly if those who are holding them realize that you're attempting some half-baked thing, they may just bump them off.
Now, Talmiz Ahmed, the former Indian ambassador to Iraq, Suresh Reddy, returned there today as a special envoy. With him there, do we have sufficient experienced manpower to handle not just a tricky and complicated situation, but one which seems to be becoming both more confused as well as more emotional for people here in India? So it's a very difficult operation. Do we have the trained manpower in Baghdad to handle this?
We have not had proper manpower in that embassy for several years because of the war situation. 10 years ago, when we had the hostage crisis, when Indian drivers had been apprehended, we had an ambassador with hardly any staff support, which is why we sent 3 officers from our ministry, and they facilitated the negotiations. At that time, you actually had a negotiator who came forward on behalf of the kidnappers. It was a kidnap situation. There was a negotiation relating to ransom, and that once the deal was struck, they were released. This is a very different situation now. This is an insurgency. It is a near war situation. Also, do recall that you have two contending parties, and there is a PR war that is happening at the same time. This time around, ISIS wants to project a positive image of itself. These people are descendants of the former Zarqawi. Zarqawi was a fierce warrior, an extremely violent individual who killed numerous people in random acts of violence. These people now want to project themselves as more reasonable, as people capable of occupying territory and also providing some semblance of governance, which is why you find that they are projecting a positive image, which is also why the Iraqi government led by Prime Minister Maliki is projecting them as terrorists and also indicating that they are holding hostages.
A quick question before I go to Shashi Tharoor. You're also therefore suggesting, by implication, that when the Iraqi government tells us that these are definitely kidnapped, and when the Iraqi government tells us that they know where they are, although the government in India can't reveal further details, we can't be absolutely sure of this information or confident of it because of the internal dynamics and politics you just mentioned. A quick answer to that, Mr. Ahmed.
Yes, of course, I agree with you that it cannot be. These are two warring factions, two warring groups, also divided by sectarianism, also divided by various other factions that have been a part of that wretched country.
In which case, I want to pick up, Shashi Tharoor, on the first part of what you heard from Talmiz Ahmed, that we don't have a properly staffed embassy. He referred to the crisis when the drivers were taken hostage, how we had to suddenly send 3 people, and we were lucky that we found a negotiator to help us out. Do you think the UPA left behind an embassy in Baghdad that was inadequately staffed for the sort of potential crisis that could have happened? I know you couldn't have imagined this would happen, but clearly good planning takes into account the exigencies that may develop in a country like Iraq. Did you fail to plan for that?
But no, we don't. What kind of staffing do you think would be adequate to go and get these people out from where they are? I mean, you're not even talking about having an extra diplomat or 2. As Talmiz said, the Iraqi government is a friendly government. We talk to the Iraqi government, but they have no means themselves to go through the fighting in order to rescue our people. So we're talking to a government that is friendly, but even they, with all their resources, cannot solve our problem for us. Let's understand that no amount of additional staff would have made a difference. But I want to disagree with Dr. Sahni's earlier comment. I want to stress that any Indian in distress abroad is the responsibility of the Indian government, whatever the reason may be for that person to be in distress, whether they put themselves in harm's way or not. The fact is, we have elected a government in our country to look after the well-being of all Indian nationals wherever they may be. And I believe it is the moral responsibility and the political responsibility of the government to do everything in its power to ensure that our Indian citizens are safe and secure. There is a clamor to bring these people back home. I agree with those who have said we don't have the means, the logistical capacity to ensure that right now. But we're hoping that the government is working, the MEA is working with whoever they can, including the international organizations on the ground, the UN mission, the Red Cross, humanitarian NGOs, whoever has transport, whoever has means of going through the lines, to see that if at the moment we can get these people free from captivity or entrapment or whatever, that they can be transported to safety and eventually flown out to India.
Praveen Swami, I want to pick up on another point made by Talmiz Ahmed when he said that we need to be aware of and very conscious of the political differences and dynamics within Iraq, and the ISIS to want to project themselves as people who are responsible, mature, and virtually a governing body, and the tendency of the Iraq government to project ISIS as terrorists. Does that mean that in a sense this reinforces your original viewpoint that what we're seeing may not necessarily be a traditional kidnap, that we need to be careful before we start accusing people of kidnapping when perhaps they're only giving us protection? Does that in a sense reinforce your argument?
I believe it does, Karan. And if I may just add, I mean, I'm reasonably sure the Iraqi government knows exactly where these people are, down to a square meter. And the reason I know this is because they've been using cell phones. And any quarter-competent military, any quarter-competent intelligence service can use that information to get a very precise bearing on where these individuals are. The problem is, even once you have that information, what do? There is somebody holding them captive. In the areas around them, there are other loosely organized militia. This is not like a regular army with a chain of command and sophisticated communication structures. Outside those other militias on the road leading up to Arbil, you have a variety of checkpoints on the first 10 kilometers leading up to defensive fortifications.
Okay.
A Christian militia has put up fearing attack by ISIS. I'm sure efforts are going on now to try and talk to the people who have these workers in their custody. Their true intentions will be clear in a short while. Then will come the problem of ensuring safe passage. And it just seems to me that rather than jumping the gun, I mean, one can totally understand that the relatives of these individuals, as of every Indian in this war zone today, must be terribly frightened, terribly nervous, but I'm not sure panic and hysteria will achieve anything towards getting people out safely.
Casey saying you were the individual who actually took the strongest position differing with Praveen Swami. Do you want, in fact, a quick reply before I take a break? Do you want to once again underscore why you don't believe and accept the theory that our workers are under some sort of protective custody, that they are definitely kidnapped, and that they could have been taken if the ISIS so wanted to safer havens in Kurdish territory? Do you want a quick response?
You see, both this and what my good friend Talmiz has said, I would not give a character certificate to ISIS so quickly. Remember that when they overran Mosul, firstly, 2 divisions of Iraqi army fled, leaving their arms and weapons and everything behind. It was a ratio of 15 to 1, and then these people caught them. Whoever they caught, they machine gunned them. So they were quite brutal in dealing with their military opponents, which you just do not do if you want to give an impression of a responsible rising power short of becoming a government. You do not take prisoners and execute them. There are Geneva Conventions on this. So I am not that sure. But I think a better bet is really the Baathist elements, what is called the King of Spades, General Adori, and elements which are traditionally friendly to India, which are involved with ISIS, as well as the Sunni heartland, where hopefully we have links with the tribal leaders, and then use the Peshmerga and the links in the Kurdish area. Bring a pressure on the ISIS. I will not wait for them to be good people.
Let me very quickly, before I take a break, bring in Naresh Gujral. As an MP of a state where 40 of your workers are trapped or kidnapped or whatever the verb, are you a little dismayed by the fact that this evening we've exposed fairly sharp divisions about whether they are kidnapped or whether they are trapped or whether they are in protective custody? Does that level of difference of opinion disturb you as an MP representing those very people who we're talking about? A quick answer.
Karan, this is all speculative. Nobody has any idea what is really going on there. It's a war zone. Bullets are flying around. What we are told by the Ministry of External Affairs is that they've advised our people, whoever has been in touch with them, that stay in, don't try to venture out. As far as these 40 are concerned, we are told by one of the families who came to Delhi from Punjab today that up until 2 days ago, they were in a cotton factory, but now they've moved to some government building. But thereafter, there has been no communication at all with these 40 workers who are trapped there.
How much more difficult does it become for the government in Delhi when they really don't have a clear idea of the condition and situation of the 40 or the nurses? They don't know who's taken them, whether it's ISIS or whether it's Sunni warlords or whether it's warring tribes, when they don't know where they are, where they don't know who to talk to, and you may on top of it have an embassy that may not be fully staffed, as Talmiz Ahmed pointed out.
It is enormous difficulty, but as far as the Tikrit nurses are concerned, some kind of a contact has been established.
But as far as the workers are concerned,
but as far as the workers are concerned, they have failed to do so. I'd like to make another point, if you give me a moment. Very quickly, I would not find it impossible to reconcile ISIS trying to appear as a administrative entity to the civilian population, and yet using extreme measures against armed adversaries, because as K.C. Singh very correctly pointed out, they overran a force that was 15 times its size only because of the sheer terror they have created in terms of anybody resisting them.
You know what you're underlining for me? For every theory, for every way of interpreting ISIS, there is an equally valid and opposite one. which makes it, in fact, even more difficult for this government. We're really operating not just in a vacuum, but we're operating, in fact, amidst conflicting theories that are almost polar opposites, and you have to sometimes choose between one or the other to decide which way to go, and it becomes very difficult to do.
It's almost impossible to do it rationally.